working. I hope it's long enough. Let's see what happens. We'll bring the table a little closer. I pressed the button already. Yeah, I pressed it.
You're beautiful.
It's good. Everything's good. Shem Hashem Nasem Natzliach. So, I want to discuss a little bit something that I found, something interesting on the Parsha. Very, very loud. Baruch Hashem, there's a lot of people today. Yeah. The Parsha says, Lo yachel devaro kechol yatzeh mipiv yasen. In the previous Parsha that we just read, it says by Nidarim, a person shouldn't profane his words, shouldn't make his words like chulin, like nothing. Rather, everything that comes out of a person's mouth, the person has to fulfill. In Judaism, in the Torah, we know that a person's mouth is very chashuv. The biggest mitzvah in the Torah, even bigger than Kibbutz Avayim, the Shulchan Aruch says, is Talmud Torah, learning Torah. It's the biggest mitzvah in the Torah, is Talmud Torah. Every moment a person is learning, he gets a mitzvah. Every single second is another mitzvah. How does a person make that mitzvah? With his mouth, speaking. Right? Davening, speaking. Yom Kippur, all the mitzvah that we do. Person's mouth, speaking. Right? When a person passes away, we say Kaddish. How are we taking him out of Gehinnom? Words, speaking. Right? All words, words, words. Our koach of Klal Yisrael is in our words. Whenever the Jewish people have a difficult time in Jewish history and they want to get out of it, how did they get out of it? Speaking, davening. So davening to Hashem, speaking to Hashem. Right? So you see, words are very powerful. Words is where our power is. The Chida writes in the name of Chesed Abraham, who was a very big Mikubal, very big Talmidei Chachamim. He writes, every single word that a person speaks, if it's a holy word, if it's Devarim Shebekdusha, he creates a holy angel. If it's a word of Tumah, he creates a negative angel. And if it's a word of Batalan, like this, useless word, stam, just to speak, he creates an angel that's useless, worthless, stam, just to be there. He says that when a person learns Torah or a person davens, those words, they fly in Shemayim. They create such Kiddusha in Shemayim. But he says when a person speaks disgusting words and he creates Tumah, those holy words that a person speaks get stuck in the Tumah. It's like, imagine taking an ice cream scoop. I heard this mashal one time from a man like 10 years ago. He said, imagine taking an ice cream scoop and digging up dirt and then taking it and putting ice cream on a cone. Ice cream is nice, but it's all full of dirt from the cone. He says a person's mouth is the same way. When a person contaminates his mouth and he comes to speak the words of Torah, comes to speak the words of Tefillah, it contaminates his words of Tefillah. It contaminates his words of Torah. He brings Rav Chaim Vital, the Arizal student, also brings the Zohar, that says every single word that a person speaks comes from a person's life source, from a person's neshama. And when a person speaks nonsense, when a person wastes his words, Rav Chaim Vital writes, he loses parts of his neshama. Parts of his neshama sort of weaken up and he loses them. He says that a person, when he looks at his words, he should be very careful how he speaks. Because everything that a person says, he creates in Shemaim either a good angel or either a bad angel. Right? And it could work for him or it could work against him. His own mouth. We know that the Gemara says that a person shouldn't open his mouth to the Satan. The Gemara says a person has to be very careful how he speaks. He shouldn't open his mouth to the Satan. There's a story with two Chachamim. One Chacham went to visit another Chacham, and this Chacham was an Avel. He was an Avel. And when the Chacham came to visit him and he was sitting in Avelut, he asked him a certain question. I forgot what the question is. He asked him a certain question. He answered him back. He said, if you would know what it feels like to be in my position, you wouldn't ask me that question. The Gemara says after that, when the Chacham left, that week somebody died in his family and he became an Avel. And when this guy who was an Avel the previous week came to visit this rabbi this week, the rabbi got upset at him. He took his nails after he cut them and he threw them at him. He said, it's because of you somebody in my family passed away and I became an Avel. Because you opened your mouth to the Satan, he told him. The Gemara says from there, you have to be careful, you ought not to open your mouth to the Satan. When he came to him and he asked him a certain question, he told him, if you know I would feel, you wouldn't ask me that question. At that moment, he opened the mouth of the Satan to go and prosecute this person by talking like that. Just by saying such words of prosecution. The Reshit Chochmah writes, when you look at the words of he says, when you look at the Rishonim, back in the day, the Chachamim, he says their tefillot would be answered right away. He brings in the name of the Sefer Yetzirah. The Sefer Yetzirah is the Sefer written by Avram Avinu. This is the Sefer that the Mekubalim used in order to be able to create. During the time of the Tanaim, they would create animals with the Sefer. Right? During the time of the Achronim also, we know the Maharal Mipra created a human being with the Sefer. It's a very chashuv holy Sefer, and over there it's very Kabbalistic. He brings, why is it that during the earlier times, the Chachamim, when they would daven, they would get answered immediately. As soon as they would open their mouths to daven, immediately on the spot they would get answered. He says, you know why? It's because they were very careful with their mouths. They were very careful to sanctify their mouths. And therefore, a person's mouth has spiritually in it, it's made of the 22 letters of the alphabet. And when a person speaks, those letters come together and they form what a person is speaking, and it brings them down into the world. And he says that since they were so careful in how they spoke, their mouth is so holy that as soon as they daven, immediately whatever they daven for happened. It says that when the Rav Chi and his children got up and they davened for rain, before they could even say the word, it already came down. As soon as they just opened their mouth, it already came down. Right? We know even the Baba Sali not too long ago. Right? He was very holy. They say everything he prayed for, he got. That's why he call him Baba Sali. It means the master of prayer. That's what the words mean. Why? Holy mouth. Be very careful with what they said. And he said also, the Zohar brings, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai used to learn Torah. He used to have thousands of angels used to come around him just to listen to his words of Torah. Because his words of Torah, his mouth was so holy, so kedushadik. He says a person needs to be very careful. The Nefesh HaChaim writes that a person shouldn't look at himself or think of himself like, he's a nothing, he's a nobody. What is he going to do? What is his actions going to do? He says, no. He says, Klal Yisrael, their whole koach is in their mouth. All of their strength is in their mouth. When we speak, we're creating, we're destroying, we're creating that reality. We're bringing it into the spiritual world and it's coming back into the physical world. It says that even by Rishaim when they speak, if they curse or something like that, it can happen. We find by Avimelech, I remember the Midrash says that Yitzchak became blind because Avimelech cursed Sarah. So far a person's mouth could go. He brings that Shlomo Melech says, Al teve'el picha ki elokim v'shamayim v'ta'aretz ki hani yodeverech me'otim. Shlomo Melech is hinting in his words, he says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in Shemayim, you're on earth. Be careful with how you speak, because just like Hashem in Shemayim creates, so to also your words create. When you speak, you have the word, you're creating at that moment what you're talking about. You know that the Chamim tell us a person should be very careful when he speaks, even when he says something. When he tells somebody, you come to somebody, this tire is no good, this is gonna pop. You're creating that existence into the world to happen. When you're speaking, you're creating that existence into the world to happen. Therefore, you should be very careful to speak very positive. Don't speak like the Satan. Don't come and tell people, you know what's gonna happen to you if you do this, this, and this, and this is gonna happen to you. Right? Why are you prosecuting? Why are you talking? Why are you creating that spiritual reality? When you're speaking, you're creating those energies. You're creating that reality. I tell you, so far that the Kaveh Yashar says that through a person's speech, you could know where a person's neshama is. He says that a person that has a good mouth, a nice mouth, a positive mouth, always speaking good, always speaking positive, always blessing, a positive person, he says, you know that his neshama is connected to the Kiddusha. You know that he has Olam Haba. The Kaveh Yashar brings that if a person is always cursing, negative mouth, negative speech, always bad, he says you already see an indication that his neshama is connected to the Tuman. This person already most likely has the Olam Haba. It's all indicated in a person's mouth. Through a person's mouth you can already see where a person's neshama is holding, the Kaveh Yashar says. I'll tell you even more. The Chidah says something unbelievable. The Chidah brings something very scary. He says, Chilul Hashem echad, when a person makes a Chilul Hashem, one Chilul Hashem, Dochem meya tefilot, it pushes away 100 prayers of a person. What is Chilul Hashem? When a person is dressed like a frum Jew, and he behaves like he shouldn't behave, when people come and look at him and tell him, this is a Jew, this is how he behaves, this is what he does, this is a religious Jew, look how he speaks, right? Sometimes we sit amongst a crowd, and people look at you like you're religious, and you speak a certain way, and people are pushed back by it, like, how is a religious person speaking like this? Or how is a religious person doing something like that? Right? When you speak like that, and when you behave like that, that's a Chilul Hashem. You desecrate Hashem's name. That people look at religious people like there's no difference between them and anybody else. Right? A person that represents Hashem, when a person puts on a yarmulke, a person puts on a tzitzit, he's representing Hashem. A representative of Hashem has to behave a different way. Representative of Hashem have to behave a different way. It says one Chilul Hashem that a person made, if somebody looks at you and said, this is a religious person, one Chilul Hashem, 100 of your tefillot don't get answered, he brings. For that one Chilul Hashem. One machloket, he brings. Doche mea parnasot, pushes away 100 times the parnas was supposed to come to a person. 100 good deals are supposed to come a person's way, they get pushed away for one machloket, he says. Carson comes, somebody starts to argue with you, you react back, start to argue, start to hate, start to flip out on the person. That one machloket, right? Reacting, just speaking back, saying something back, making that one machloket, says pushes away 100 parnasot from a person. It says Lashon Hara echad, when a person speaks one Lashon Hara. The Chida writes, imagine somebody comes to you and he asks you, you know this person, how is he? He's a good boy, I want to make a shidduch. Nah, leave him alone. No shoot, to start speaking about him. Right? One Lashon Hara, doche met teshuvot. A person stands on Yom Kippur, does tshuva, does vidui. One Lashon Hara pushes a person's 100 times pushes away a person's teshuvah away, that a person's teshuvah won't be accepted. One Lashon Hara. The Chafetz Chaim counts how many avirot a person can make while he's speaking Lashon Hara. He says up to 34 avirot he can make in speaking Lashon Hara. Imagine a person having a conversation with Lashon Hara. How much a person is contaminating his mouth, speaking Lashon Hara. Not only that, the Chovot HaLevavot writes, when a person speaks Lashon Hara about somebody, he takes his avirot and he gives them his mitzvot. The switch, chalipin. Right? It's not worth it. There's no benefit to it. It's always best, stay quiet. Right? Shayag lechokhmah shtikan. It says you want to be wise, always stay quiet. You can never go wrong staying quiet. That's for sure. Right? Because once you said something, you said it. Your word now is in control of you. But before you said it, you're in control of your words. You're in control of the situation. Nivul peh echad. What's nivul peh? A person has a disgusting mouth. A person that speaks nasty. A person that curses. A person's time. You see, sometimes you sit with the person, the way he speaks is not pleasant. Very, very low class. Not pleasant the way they speak. Very degrading. Very nasty. They say nasty words, disgusting words, perverted words. Right? It says such a person, nivul peh echad. One time you say something, there's the chidan. Doche mea haftachot. Even if Hashem made 100 guarantees in Shemaim that He signed, even if there's 100 guarantees in Shemaim that were signed and that a person is going to get, those 100 guarantees get nullified. Imagine that. Shavua shav echad, bizu Torah echad. A person degrades the words of Torah. Say the rabbi gets up in the shul to speak. A person says, nah, come on another. He goes outside, speaks Devarim B'Teilim. Goes, speaks about cars and watches outside. 10 minutes, sit and learn, sit and read in the shul. Why are you going? Right? Doesn't care. Not interested. Right? Bizu Torah, a person that degrades the words of Torah. One time, if he degraded the words of Torah, doche meya semachot. He pushes away from himself 100 times that he was supposed to be happy. Meaning to say in Shemaim, they make a gezerah, how much simcha a person is supposed to have that year, how much happiness a person is supposed to have that year. Say 80%, 90%. Say he's supposed to have, a certain amount of happiness. He pushes away 100 simchas, 100 times of being happy. Every single time he degrades Torah. Why? So sometimes you see a person always depressed, right? Right? Got to be careful. Shavua shav echad, a person that swears. Right? I swear to you like this, I swear to you like that. He's swearing for no reason. It's not like, in fact, doche mezechuyot. Right? Person has zuchuyot that protect him in Shemayim. Person swears for no reason. Those zuchuyot don't have the ability to protect him, he says. Look at the Chida says. Gezel echad, stealing, right? What's considered stealing? It's not only when I'm physically taking your stuff and putting it in my pocket. Stealing could be when you come to me and you want to buy something. And I trick you, I don't tell you. You come to me, you want to buy a car. And there's a little bit of a defect. I know you're not going to catch it until 3 months when the car breaks down on you. You're going to find out what happened, right? Or I saw you a watch and there's a little part in there that's not real, right? That I put in there, whatever it might be, right? And I don't tell you anything. Or I tell you something defected. Or you come to me and you want to buy a diamond, whatever it is, and I trick you. I tell you it's not what it really is. That's all considered stealing in halacha. That's all considered gezel in halacha. Or I overprice you and I cheat you for something that I know is not worth that amount, and I convince you that it is worth that amount. And you bought it from me thinking that it is worth that amount. You find out afterwards you got ripped off. You come back to me, tell them, oh, you ripped me off. Too bad, right? That's also considered stealing, right? Person's cheating, stealing, or a person's lying, right? And through lying, you'll be able to deceive somebody in order to be able to take more from that person. That's also considered stealing, right? Says every time a person steals, doche mea brachot. He pushes away 100 brachot from coming on him. That means that in Shemayim, if they decree that he should have 1,000 brachot this year, every time a person steals, he's pushing away more and more bracha from himself. More and more bracha from himself. Right? So every time a person steals. Right? And the Chida writes over here, you see how dangerous it is that a person has to be, how careful a person is. Right? Most of these things, a lot of these things here depend on a person's speech. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yanai thought that his Chatan one time did something wrong and he cursed him. And then he realized afterwards that he misjudged him, right? It says, but what? The curse came true and his Chatan got sick and he died anyways. Rav Yaakov Daniarov, when he brings over here, asks a question. He says, we know that the Gemara says that tzaddikim, whatever they say happens. If they make a decree, it happens, right? Why? Because people that fear God, people that are tzaddikim, Hashem fulfills their will. If they want something, Hashem does it for them. But it says over here, he cursed them by accident. He didn't really want it. How did it happen? He said, you know why? He says, because the words of somebody that's holy, the words of a righteous person, his mouth is like a two-edged sword. It's automatically very sharp. Even if he just says it by accident, even if it just comes out of his mouth, it has the ability to be able to happen. He says one time, as Rav Chalan Wasserman, he was in yeshiva, and one of the yeshiva bachrim accidentally, saw like some bums outside, and he told them something not nice. One of these guys came in drunk, and he wanted to find this yeshiva bachrim, he wanted to beat him up. And the Rosh Yeshiva came in, right? And he tells the Rosh Yeshiva, bli yadayim, like without hands. The Rosh Yeshiva tells him, you bli yadayim, you without hands. It says within a few days that kid got the teenager, whatever, his hands got paralyzed. Why? Just because the rabbi said it, just because the individual said it. How much a person has to be careful with his mouth. How careful a person has to be with his mouth. We know that in the Gemara brings several stories that when people say something, that is very dangerous. It says that even Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu told Hashem, Mecheni na me'sifrechan, erase me from your Sefer Torah if you're not going to forgive the Jewish people. Even though Hashem forgave the Jewish people, but Moshe Rabbeinu's name had to be erased from one parasha, just for his words to be fulfilled, because once he said it, it had to happen. Once he said it had to happen. So how much as a person has to be careful always to speak positive. Always to speak positive. Positive words create positive outcome. When a person is speaking negative, it's only going to generate negativity in a person's life. David HaMelech says, Shomer piv ulshono, shomer mitzarot nafsho. A person wants to save his body and his soul from suffering, you watch your mouth, you watch how you speak. If you speak good and you speak positive, and you always enforce and you speak that, you're generating those energies into the world, and that's what's going to come back to you. What goes around comes around, right? If you speak good and you speak nicely and you generate good, it's going to all come back to you. It's all going to generate back to you. Now, I want to get into halacha. Last week we have another 10 minutes. Last week we started in regards to the laws of Pat Yisrael and Pat Akum, right? What's considered Pat Yisrael? Not many people are aware of what Pat Yisrael is. We said that Pat Yisrael is that Chachamim made a gezerah, they made a decree that you are not allowed to eat bread that was baked by a goy. Right? There has to be some Jewish intervention involved. So the Chachamim made a gezerah that any bread baked by a goy you're not allowed to eat. What's the reason why you're not allowed to eat that bread that was baked by a goy? Because when a goy bakes bread, you go and you buy it from him, or you go to him and you eat with him, it brings closeness between us and the goyim. So therefore the Chachamim said, we want to keep you away. Just like they didn't allow us to drink their wine if they touch it. Just like if a goy cooks, you're not allowed to eat it. So to also, Chachamim wanted to keep us away from goyim. Instead, if a goy breaks your bread or your cookies or anything like that, since this is a common food and it's something that's going to bring us commonly around the goyim, it could lead to relationships, and therefore Chachamim wanted to keep us away. They didn't allow it. However, this isur that the Chachamim said that a person has to have only bread that had Jewish intervention as a recognition that we know we have to stay away from them, this isur didn't spread itself out everywhere. Meaning to say, it wasn't accepted everywhere, because when they made this isur, it was very hard for it to be accepted by Klal Yisrael, because it was hard for people not to be able to buy bread from a goy. There was not enough Jewish supply. So therefore, the Chachamim later on, they saw that it wasn't a gezerah, it wasn't a decree that was able to withheld. It was very difficult for people to refrain from buying bread from goyim. So what happened? The Chachamim came along and they allowed it. So there's a machloket how they allowed it. Did they allow it fully, or did they only allow it in certain circumstances? The Shulchan Aruch HaMechaber, the one that wrote the Shulchan Aruch, which we follow, Rav Yosef Karo, the Shulchan Aruch, the Sephardi Psak, he says that it was asur, it remains to be intact, but it was only permissible in certain circumstances. The Ramah, the Ashkenazi posek, he says by the Ashkenazi countries it was permitted completely. That for Ashkenazim it's much less lenient for them, that if they want to go and buy regular OU bread, say let's use Arnold's for example, regular OU bread. What does regular OU bread mean? That the ingredients are kosher, but everything else was done by the goyim. The baking, the turning on the fire, there's no Jewish intervention whatsoever. So if there's no Jewish intervention whatsoever, according to the simple understanding of the Shulchan Aruch, according to the simple halach of the Shulchan Aruch, which the Sephardim should be following, is that it would not be permissible for us to eat. Or cookies. You go to Costco, whatever it is, and they have a kosher station, they have cookies and cakes, right, and all these different things. It just has the regular hechsher, it's not Pat Yisrael, there's no Jewish intervention allowed. That also, according to halacha, should be asur. But we'll see that even though according to the Shulchan Aruch, anything that was baked by a goy is asur, however, the Shulchan Aruch does give an exception. You know that it says that if you have cookies or anything baked, or bread, or cereals, or anything baked, that you don't have a kosher alternative, meaning to say that if I have cereal, say Wheaties for example, or Cheerios, right? If I have cereal that I'm buying, it's not Pat Yisrael. It was baked, everything was done by a goy fully. So even according to the Shulchan Aruch there, it would be permissible. Why? Because the Shulchan Aruch says, even though this Easter is still intact, but if I cannot find an alternative in a Jewish brand, then it's considered like that bread or that cereal or that cookie that was made by a goy, of course with all the Jewish ingredients, that's considered like pat de chukah lo. When the Chachamim allowed bread baked by a goy or cookies and so on, they allowed it only in cases where you didn't have another option to find Jewish bread. So the Shulchan Aruch says that if the other options that you have are not on par to the goyish bread, that means that the goyim make it better, it tastes better, or whatever it might be, then even according to the Shulchan Aruch, such a thing would be allowed. So it comes out to be that api halacha, if you have bread, whole wheat bread here, whole wheat bread here, they both taste the same. Regular rye bread, they both taste the same. One is Pat Yisrael, one is not. According to the Shulchan Aruch, it's asur for you to buy the one that's not Pat Yisrael. You must buy the one that's Pat Yisrael. But if the one that's made by the non-Jewish brand is better, and the Jewish brand is not up to par with it, so there is a leniency only that applies here by bread and by cookies and so on, since this prohibition altogether later on, the Chachamim allowed it under circumstances because it was very difficult for people to live without it. Therefore, it's much more lenient. We have a much more lenient approach to it. So therefore, if you find cereals or cookies and breads that are not Pat Yisrael, but you don't have alternatives to them, these taste much better than the ones that are Pat Yisrael. There, even according to the Shulchan Aruch, which is the Sephardi posek, it would be allowed to buy these cereals, these breads, and so on. However, Api Kabbalah, they're always machmir. Api Kabbalah, you're not allowed to have at all. I saw that the Bukharians in Bukhara, the minhag was, I saw they brought down a Shulchan Aruch, that the Talmidei Chachamim always had Pat Yisrael, always were makpid. The Hamon Ha'am, the regular ordinary people, during the week they would eat bread baked by a goy, but on Shabbat they would be very careful only to have Pat Yisrael. Why? Because Shabbat is very holy, it's very kadosh. You want to bring the bread on the table, you want it also to have a kiddusha to it. That whenever a Jew makes something or puts his, does something, cooking, baking, whatever it might be, his energies are in there. His kiddusha is in there. Right? You have the energies of the person doing. He says if Shabbat is very holy, they said that you should have Pat Yisrael. You don't want it to be not Pat Yisrael on Shabbat. So even in Bukhara, they were makpid on Shabbat only to have Pat Yisrael. Even if during the week you would not have Pat Yisrael. Also, what is considered Pat? What is considered Pat Yisrael? What is a part of bread and what is not a part of bread? Meaning to say, the Shulchan Aruch says that if you have bread and they smear eggs on top when they're baking it, right? Is that allowed? Why wouldn't it be allowed? It's bread, right? The eggs on top, what's the eggs on top? It's just there for look. There is a Shulchan Aruch that says, say if I have gosh gajen or potato knish, right? Potato knish, if a goy makes a potato knish for you, or if a goy makes gosh gajen for you, is that allowed? It's not allowed. Why? Because by a goy, he's not allowed to make food for you. You have to have a Jew make the food for you, right? So if you have the leniency that a goy that's allowed to make bread for you, but if you have something in there that doesn't fall under the category of bread, for example, gosh gaden, I have it's baked, but since there's meat inside and that meat requires bishul Yisrael, the flavors of the meat that require a Jew to cook it, it'll absorb itself into the actual bread, into the dough, and now that dough will not become permissible. Even though I will tell you that a goy is allowed to bake bread, but when you have meat inside or something inside that bread that requires a Jewish person to cook it, then it would not permit altogether the whole entire mixture. So by bread, if I have bread and I put a little egg on top in order just for it to be there for look, so there, do we say that the egg is subject to Jewish cooking and it wouldn't be enough for a goy to bake it? A Jew would actually need to put the bread into the oven? Or do we say no, the bread is the main thing and you just put a little egg on top for the look, and since the bread is permissible, because by bread we want to say that if a goy makes it and you don't have an alternative, it's okay. So the bread is okay, but there's a little egg on top. But the egg is subject to Jewish cooking. That's not a part of the whole heter of bread that was baked by a goy. So there the Shulchan Aruch says it's okay. Why? He says because when you're putting egg just for the look. It's just there for the look, so therefore it would not be subject to bishul Yisrael. Oh, so egg inside, egg challah, for example, or breads with egg inside is not real eggs. It's coloring. Not only that, even if it's inside, if it's completely evaporated and not noticeable, it would be bottled to the bread anyways, right? But all that coloring that you see in egg challah is not real egg, it's a coloring. They have like a certain coloring they put inside the egg challah and it makes it yellow. It looks like it's eggs. It's not real eggs, it's all just coloring, it's all just a sketch, right? What about pancakes? Somebody asked me last week in blintzes. He said blintzes, right? If I go and I see blintzes and a goy made it, does it fall under the category of baking or is blintzes considered cooking? Why? Because if I take regular dough, and I put it on a pot on a fire, so if it's baking on the pot, it doesn't need to be in the oven to bake, it can bake on the pot. So that's baking. But blintzes, since it's very thin, and when you're putting it inside of a pot, and it's cooking, right? So since blintzes are very thin, it cooks inside the oil or cooks inside the butter, that's not considered baking. Blintzes are not considered baking, that's considered cooking. And by cooking, we're more stringent. By cooking, there is no allowance that if a goy cooked it, you're allowed to eat it. Nobody allows that. There, you need the actual Jew to have intervention 100%. For Ashkenazim, enough to turn on the fire. For Sephardim, you have to actually cook the blintzes. And therefore, if you would have blintzes, it would be subject to cooking and not to baking. So therefore, you need to make sure that there would be Jewish intervention by blintzes. It wouldn't be enough just to buy blintzes without any Jewish intervention. Okay, I think it's very loud. We'll stop over here. Next week, I guess we'll quiet it down a little bit. It's very hard to speak like this. רבי חנן בן הקשה אומר, הצעה הקדוש ברוך הוא לזכור ישראל, לפי כך הרבה רם תורה ומצוות שמר האדוני חפץ למען צדקו יגדיל תורה ויאדיר.